Brahmins. The Bani Israel, sons of Israel, are a historic community of Jews who have been suggested as descendants of one of the lost tribes of Israel who had settled there centuries ago. 42 genetic analysis shows that the Bani Israel of India cluster with the indigenous populations of western India, but do have a clear paternal link to the populations of the Levant. 43 A recent more detailed study on Indian Jews has reported that the paternal ancestry of Indian Jews is composed of Middle East-specific haplogroups as well as common South Asian haplogroups, including R1a. 44. The Greeks were aware of a class of Indian philosophers whom they referred to as gymnosophists. In Of Education, Clearchus of Soli, a Greek philosopher of the 4th and 3rd century BC, claimed that the gymnosophists are descendants of the Magi. In a text quoted by Josephus, Clearchus reported a dialogue with Aristotle who stated that the Hebrews were descendants of the Indian philosophers. Jews are derived from the Indian philosophers, they are named by the Indians Kalami, and by the Syrians Judaei, and took their name from the country they inhabit, which is called Judea, but for the name of their city, it is a very awkward one, for they call it Jerusalem. 45. Arwana is also found among another people who claim descent from Alexander the Great, the Kalasha or Kalash of Pakistan. 46. The Kalash people's reputed connection to Alexander the Great is the basis of the famous Rudyard Kipling story The Man Who Would Be King. There is also a tradition among the Pashtuns, a people native to Afghanistan and Pakistan, of being descended from the exiled lost tribes of Israel as well. 47. According to the Encyclopedia of Islam, the theory of Pashtun descent from Israelites is traced to Makhzani Afghani, a history compiled for Khan-e-Jahan Lodhi in the 16th century. In his universal history Miratul Alam, The Mirror of the World, Bukhtawar Khan, d. 1685, describes the journeys of the Pashtuns from the Holy Land to Ghor, Ghazni, and Kabul. The Yusufzai, literally the descendants of Yusuf, is a tribe of Pashtun people found in Pakistan, and in some eastern parts of Afghanistan. Pakistani activist for female education and the youngest Nobel Prize laureate, Malala Yousafzai also belongs to the family. South Asian populations have the highest concentrations of R1A1A, with the highest concentrations being represented among the West Bengal Brahmin caste of India. 48. The Brahmins were the highest ranking of the 4 social classes of India's caste system, a class system based on birth, which corresponds almost exactly to Plato's class system in his Republic. Plato divides his just society into 3 classes, the guardians, the warriors, and the producers. The Indian castes or varnas include Brahmins, priests, Kshatriyas, ruling and military, Vaishyas, merchants and farmers, Shudras, peasants, and Dalits, untouchables. India's class system is unique, as no other major culture historically used a fully hereditary class system that was as defined and tied to their faith as the Indians. The system is considered part of the trifunctional hypothesis of prehistoric Proto-Indo-European, reflected in the existence of 3 classes or castes: priests, warriors, and commoners. The thesis is primarily associated with the French mythographer Georges Dumézil, who proposed it in 1929. A 2001 study found that the genetic affinity of Indians to Europeans is proportionate to caste rank, the upper castes being most similar to Europeans, whereas lower castes are more like Asians. The researchers believe that the Indo-European speakers entered India from the northwest, mixing with or displacing the Proto-Dravidian speakers, and may have established a caste system with themselves primarily in higher castes. 49. However, despite attempts to attribute its introduction by the ancient Aryans, the Indian caste system was a later development. The Mahabharata, whose final version is estimated to have been completed by the end of the 4th century, discusses the Varna system in section 12.181, presenting 2 models. The first model describes Varna as a color-based system. Through a character named Bhrigu, Brahmins' Varna was white, Kshatriyas was red, Vaishyas was yellow, and the Shudras black. Many of the restrictions imposed upon the Brahmins are outlined in the Manusmriti, also known as the Laws of Manu, one of the first Sanskrit texts to have been translated into English in 1776, by Sir William Jones, and which was used to formulate the Hindu law by the British colonial government. In accordance with their attempts to construct an Aryan pedigree of the Indo-Europeans, Jones and Carl Wilhelm Friedrich Schlegel assigned Manusmriti to the period of around 1250 BCE and 1000 BCE respectively. However, more recent scholarship has shifted the chronology of the text to between 200 BC and 200 AD. 50. The origin myth of the Chitpavan Brahmins. A Hindu Maharashtrian Brahmin community inhabiting Konkan, the coastal region of the state of Maharashtra in India as a shipwrecked people, is similar to the mythological story of the Bani Israel Jews of the Raigad district, who claim to be descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. 51. The Bani Israel claim that Chitpavans are also of Jewish origin. 52. Until the 21st century, India had the largest number of Jews of any country east of Iran. According to Nathan Katz in Contacts Between Jewish and Indo-Tibetan Civilizations Through the Ages, some explorations, in the West, our numerical notation system is incorrectly referred to as Arabic numerals when, in fact, they were brought from India via the Middle East and into Europe by Jews. 53. Many Arab travelers record a Jewish presence in India. The 9th century geographer Abu Said al-Hasan mentioned Jewish communities in India and Ceylon. The greatest Muslim traveler al-Biruni, of the 10th and 11th centuries, left the most extensive account. He held that the people of Kashmir were descendants of Jews, and that there was a large Jewish community there. Other great Muslim writers also discussed Indo-Jewish links, including al-Idrisi of the 12th century and especially Ibn Battuta of the 14th century. According to his biographer Philostratus, Apollonius of Tyana, c. 15, c. 100 AD, was also said to have traveled to India, and was welcomed by its kings, and was, with Damis, his companion, for 4 months the guest of its Brahmins. Apollonius had met the gymnosophists of India before his arrival in Egypt, and repeatedly compared the Ethiopian gymnosophists with them. He regarded them to be derived from the Indians. They lived without any cottages nor houses, but had a shelter for the visitors. They did not wear any clothes and thus compared themselves to the Olympian athletes. They shared their vegetarian meal with him. 54. The occult schools of Alexandria in Egypt had long known of the ascetic philosophers of India as gymnosophists. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gnostic Gospels found near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, is named for the Apostle Thomas, who is traditionally believed by Christians in Kerala, on the Malabar coast, to have spread Christianity among the Jews there. Edward Kins, a British scholar of Buddhism, pointed out that Buddhists were in contact with the Thomas Christians who knew and used the Gospel of Thomas in South India. 55. Gnostic scholar Elaine Pagels mentioned that, trade routes between the Greco-Roman world and the Far East were opening up at the time when Gnosticism flourished, AD 80 to 200, for generations. Buddhist missionaries had been proselytizing in Alexandria. 56. Pagels also reports that Hippolytus, a Christian scholar in Rome, wrote about the Indian Brahmins' heresy. In his ecclesiastical history, Eusebius, the 3rd century Christian bishop of Caesarea, wrote of Jewish settlements in India existing as early as the 1st century AD. He discussed an Alexandrian Stoic philosopher by the name of Pantaenus, who was sent as far India to evangelize the heathen in the East. Pantaenus, known as the tutor to Clement of Alexandria and Origen, made his journey shortly after the reign of Marcus Aurelius, which would place him in India around 181 AD. In the 9th century, Ibn Wahab wrote about the Cochin Jews, also known as Malabar Jews, the Jewish community of Cranganore, near Kochi, Cochin, on the Malabar coast in southwest India. Comprising one of 3 major distinct Jewish communities in India, the Cochin Jews are called Kochanim in Hebrew, though the majority now live in Israel. Their roots are claimed to date back to the time of King Solomon. 57. They settled in the kingdom of Cochin, now part of the state of Kerala. According to the history of the works of the learned, 1699, published in England, a letter in Hebrew was brought from India, in which the Cochin Jews recounted the story of their ancestors' arrival in Malabar after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. 58 According to Josephus, during the siege of Masada by Roman troops at the end of the First Jewish-Roman War, 66–73, which resulted in the destruction of the Second Temple, the Sicarii martyrs who committed mass suicide were inspired by the speeches of their leader Eleazar, to follow the example of the Indian philosophers, an example of fearlessness based on their firm belief in the eternity of the soul. According to the letter, the king who reigned in India at the time granted them a province called Shingli, Cranganore, near the city of Cochin, Kochi. 59. During the 12th century, a number of Jewish travelers visited India and wrote about Jewish life there. The most influential was Benjamin of Tudela, who left extensive descriptions of the Jews of southwest India. Speaking of Kollam, Quilon, on the Malabar coast, he wrote in his itinerary, throughout the island, including all the towns thereof, live several thousand Israelites. The inhabitants are all black, and the Jews also. The latter are good and benevolent. They know the law of Moses and the prophets, and to a small extent the Talmud and Halacha. 60 It was during the same century that Maimonides wrote that his Mishnah Torah was studied in India. A quatrain by the 14th century Rabbi Nissim of Spain expresses his pleasure at finding a Jewish king at Shingli, just north of Kochi. 61. The ancient spice trade followed land and sea routes between the Middle East and South India. The famous silk routes, which may date from as early as the 2nd century AD, linked Europe with China. Muslim travelers' diaries from the 9th and 10th century AD testify to the prominent role of Jews in both these trades. Ibn Khordadbeh, an official of the Baghdad Caliphate, in his Book of Roads and Kingdoms, ca. 870, described the commercial activities of the Radhanites, Jewish merchants in the Trans-Eurasian trade network. Radhanites, who were based in northern Spain or southern France, maintained a number of distinct trading routes, including one that traversed Central Europe from Spain through France, Germany, Eastern Europe, the kingdoms of the Khazars, Asia, and thence into China. Another ran along the southern coast of Europe from Spain through Burgundy, Italy, the Balkans, Greece, Turkey, Baghdad, India, and around Indonesia to China. Another traversed Spain, North Africa, Egypt, Arabia, Yemen, and India, linking up to China. 62.